To have a full house, it can be jittery for the speaker. But
I'm sorry, I'll interject for a second. I apologize for having said that post lunch is not a good session. Now the house is full, it's a very good session.
I was about to say that it is jittery for a speaker to be facing a full audience, and what is worse is that the speaker expecting the audience to be sparse and then it fills up. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For this opportunity, I really thank IDSA, which I consider my alma mater in a sense, because it is here that I learned the ropes of academic research, and I guess so it's also time to pay back. Now, most regional countries want India to be more proactive. Yesterday, there was a mention of the ASEAN Secretary General wanting India to be a balancer. We also discussed the US wanting India to be a net security provider in Asia. Let me begin with what Professor Barry Buzan advised India this morning, not to be altruistic and as a rising power to take on the responsibility of global management. And yesterday, my colleague Namrata Goswami, she triggered the debate yesterday by saying that India's national articulation through the Indo-US joint statement about being outward looking, about playing a role in the freedom of the seas, and so on. Of course, this I guess would make Professor Barry Buzan happy, but the issue is how do we do it? I will try to address this issue to the extent that is within my mandate, which is not very wide, but I will try to do that. Now, broadly, India would need to use its various forms of national power. Now, maritime military power seems to be just one of the various instruments that the country has. But then, given the geographic realities of Asia, as the Chief of the Naval Staff emphasized yesterday, how India employs its maritime military power would be very crucial. Of course, there would be the issue of capability that needs to be factored. But first, let us be very clear about the intent. And by intent, I mean the doctrine. I will begin with an overview of the key maritime doctrinal documents. Thereafter, I would examine their provisions relevant to regional security. In this context, I would then address the capability dimension. Finally, I would attempt to initiate a discussion on the prospects for maritime power projection by India. The Maritime Doctrine lays down the principles governing the use of maritime military power and provides a common conceptual platform. The first ever Indian Maritime Doctrine was published in 2004 and was revised in 2009. The Maritime Military Strategy document titled Freedom to Use the Seas was published in 2007. It complements the Indian Maritime Doctrine by providing the context for employment of maritime forces in a specified medium-term time frame, and thus I consider it as an extension of the doctrine. The doctrine begins by defining India's areas of maritime interest, which are differentiated into primary and secondary areas. The primary areas broadly lie in the northern Indian Ocean. The secondary areas are broadly coincident with the Western Pacific, and together, as the chair said, they fall into the Indo-Pacific region. Now, at the outset, we must acknowledge that India cannot play a regional role unless it can take care of its fundamental security interest of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Therefore, I begin with the overarching national security imperatives. The first is strategic deterrence. Strategic deterrence operates at the national strategic level. It leverages all elements of national power Under the military component, the Indian Navy plays a key role through forward presence in the areas of interest, reinforced by constructive maritime engagement, which includes naval exercises with major powers. In this regard, the Strategy 2007 document says that when dealing with more capable adversary, deterrence can be achieved through partnerships, combining capabilities, or presenting a picture of solidarity, notwithstanding lack of the option of formal alliances. Was the five-nation Malabar naval exercises held in September 2007, which created so much of a furore in pitching, an example of this? You may think about it. Possibly yes, in my view. Nuclear deterrence is a part of strategic deterrence. With three nuclear weapon states sharing borders, Asia is particularly risk-borne. India's nuclear deterrence is critical for regional stability. India's nuclear doctrine does not mention the underwater component of the nuclear triad, but the Maritime Doctrine does. It says the sea-based leg of the nuclear triad enables a survivable second strike capability and is thus a critical enabler for the no first use doctrine. Also, its credibility lends to low arsenal levels and thus to arms control stability. But of course, we need to develop capabilities, which we are doing. Conventional deterrence is another component of strategic deterrence. India's deterrence has been ineffective against Pakistan's proxy war in terms of the support to jihadis. Now, this has forced India to focus on its internal and coastal security rather than playing a more proactive regional role. The doctrine provides for a concept called compellence, which is essentially deterrence by punishment. It involves inflicting escalatory punishment upon the opponent until it concedes to what you want. Due to its inherent attributes, naval power is well suited to control escalation. Hence, the Indian Navy provides the option to India's political leadership to shift from passive deterrence against Pakistan to deterrence by punishment. In support of India's foreign policy, Indian Navy seeks to contribute to security multilateralism in Asia through constructive engagement. This is exemplified by Indian Navy's initiatives such as the Milan in Port Blair since 1995, on which the CNS spoke yesterday, the periodic international fleet reviews, and also the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium launched in 2008. Such engagement is also essential to reinforce the existing multilateral structures such as the IORA by engaging with the maritime security forces of the IOR and extra-regional stakeholders, including through combined naval exercises. Could such engagement lead to India's foreign policy objectives in terms of shaping the political behavior of regional states? Yesterday, Professor S.D. Muni spoke about India nudging Myanmar towards democracy and opening up. I recall that in 2006, a Myanmar Navy corvette visited Port Blair for the Indian Navy's Milan. It was for the first time in 4 decades that a Myanmarese warship visited any foreign port. Could there be a link? There may be stakeholders like China with whom India's interests may not always converge. In this case too, constructive engagement is necessary to manage strategic competition and deconflict naval operations. Maritime engagement includes capacity building of regional maritime forces through technical military assistance. Very recently in December last year, India delivered a patrol vessel Barracuda to the Mauritius Coast Guard. This was the first warship ever built specifically on a foreign order. Of course, this would also make the Prime Minister Modi happy about his Make in India campaign. The doctrine provides for the Indian Navy to ensure good order at sea through low intensity maritime operations that the audience, I think, is quite familiar with piracy, terrorism. Of course, something that has not received adequate attention in this conference so far is the rise of religious fundamentalism in Asia. Linked to it is the emerging threat of maritime jihad in the Western Indian Ocean, particularly to ships transiting the maritime choke points. The doctrine has catered for this. A notable doctrinal emphasis is on visit, board, search and seizure operations, which is essential for such operations. This is also among the facets where Indian Navy has benefited from combined naval exercises with major navies. I say that to indicate that while I am showing you discrete windows in terms of doctrinal provisions, they are all closely interlinked. An important responsibility of the Navy is to uphold the tenets of international law, particularly in terms of freedom of navigation and overflight in international space. Dr. Win from Vietnam spoke about it yesterday. The title of the Indian Maritime Strategy, Freedom to Use the Seas, clearly denotes the emphasis. The document says India's maritime military strategy is underpinned on such freedom for our national purposes under all circumstances. The 2011 incident of the Indian warship Airawat being interrogated in international waters of Vietnam was widely reported. The caller identified himself as the Chinese Navy and stated that you are entering Chinese waters. However, unlike some major powers, India's doctrine does not stipulate military assertion of navigation rights by its naval forces. Nonetheless, the Indian Navy has lately taken proactive measures to ensure that its practitioners are conversant with the nuances of law. An example is the recent promulgation of the Handbook on the Law of Maritime Operations. Besides the threat of terrorism that I mentioned earlier, the maritime choke points of Asia are also vulnerable to asymmetric means by state actors. Even low technology sea mines present a credible risk to shipping in these areas. The doctrine has thus always laid much emphasis on mine countermeasures. Stability operations are meant to provide security assistance to a friendly country on request and for peace support operations. For example, the Indian Navy has been involved in assisting the governments of Seychelles and Maldives against coup attempts. It has also supported the Indian forces in Sri Lanka to enforce a negotiated settlement following the civil war. As a global trend, medium navies rarely contribute to peacekeeping. The Indian Navy has participated only once in such mission in Somalia in 1994, where its role was limited to providing naval gunfire support and de-induction of troops. Indian Navy's participation in such missions may increase in the coming years, wherein the inherent flexibility of naval forces could provide greater options to the operational commander. India's involvement in non-UN coalitions cannot be ruled out either. In 2007, the Indian Defence Minister explicitly acknowledged the possibility of the involvement of our armed forces, and he said, and I quote, not necessarily under the aegis of the UN, in resolving the ongoing conflicts and diffusing international tensions, unquote. However, the political decision for involvement in such missions would be guided by the accepted international norms. Humanitarian missions may be undertaken in response to maritime disasters, for medical missions, search and rescue, non-combatant evacuation, or in many other forms. The Indian Navy's HADR response to the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami is well known. The Indian Navy also seeks to enhance its regional humanitarian role through medical missions. In 2006, it undertook a joint regional medical mission with the US Navy, with Indian naval doctors embarked on board the USNS Mercy. Non-combatant evacuation is an important task entrusted to the Navy. While the safety and security of Indian overseas diaspora living in unstable regional countries is a major national concern, it contributes to regional security. During the Lebanon mission in 2006, the Indian naval ships evacuated not only Indian citizens but more than 500 foreign nationals. Now let me address the issue of capability. Now the aim of the doctrine is only to indicate the intention and provide direction to the forces. There will always be capability voids preventing the fructification of the intent, but these are required to be filled up progressively. The broad ones, in my view, are shown on the slide. The concept of distant operations indicates the intent to play a role in both the primary as well as the secondary areas of maritime interest, but some challenges exist. Although the Navy has sought to attain blue water status, the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks was a major setback. It compelled a shift in focus to coastal security. Nonetheless, with the ongoing augmentation of the capabilities of the Coast Guard and the Marine Police and resort to technological force multipliers to enhance littoral MDA, we could place our earlier blue water plan back on track. More specifically, distant operations require sustained operations without the support of home bases. Since India does not possess overseas bases, the intent is to carry all logistics, including ordnance stores, technical services and so on, as integral to the naval force, but such capability is still at the nascent stage of development. The constraints are aggravated by Indian Navy's increasing out-of-area commitments. For constabulary role, the Indian Navy doesn't have enough low-cost vessels optimized for distant low-end missions. So counter-piracy in the Gulf of Aden is being conducted by high-value frigates. This is stretching the available pool of principal warships and adversely affecting exercises and training for their primary role. Besides counter-piracy, the long-range deployment of principal warships for presence and surveillance missions are also increasing, stretching the resources further. To offset this, the Navy seeks to multitask its deployed ships and conduct exercises multilaterally rather than bilaterally. Another notable deficit is the inadequacy of sea lift and integral airlift capacity. Large amphibious platforms are necessary for stability and humanitarian operations. The 2004 tsunami made India realize this gaping void, which led to the induction of INS Jalashwa, the first landing platform dock in 2006. But we need more such ships. During the relief operations, the Indian Navy was compelled to convert survey ships into hospital ships, but we still do not have a dedicated hospital ship. The non-availability of a standing marine force integral to the amphibious platforms is another shortcoming. Another grey area is mine countermeasures, which is highly relevant to India's regional security role. Yesterday, our guest delegate from Japan, Dr. Satoru, offered a proposal for India-Japan joint venture to develop such capability. I found it encouraging. This is the value of such conferences in terms of finding convergences. In the context of what I have covered so far, let me finally, and this is my last, now let me examine the prospects for India's maritime power projection in peacetime. The 2007 document says, during long years of peace, we need to project power. The document expounds on it by saying that peacetime power projection for middle powers, that is like India, is mainly cooperative. However, the latest document, that is the 2009 one, introduces the concept of expeditionary operations as another form of maritime power projection. Now, this has led to an academic inquiry both in India and abroad to establish whether India intends to resort to hard power projection in peacetime and if this could translate into it turning into a regional hegemon. An analysis deduces that the idea that India as a land of Mahatma Gandhi has rejected and will continue to reject military power projection is untenable. Nonetheless, in the medium term, the limitations of political will and military capacity will prevent India from achieving some of more ambitious power projection goals. By now, the limitations of military capacities already known to the audience. While the Navy may be able to overcome these constraints, political will is likely to be the key restraining factor for India, and in a constructive sense. This may be attributable to the traditional stand of India's political leadership. Over the years, the views of the naval leadership has reflected the same stand. While assisting Seychelles to quell the coup attempt in 1986, for example, the then Indian Navy Chief Admiral Tahiliani had commented, "We must take the responsibility that size imposes upon us without having any hegemonistic aspirations. Coming to help of a small neighbor is a responsibility, but we have no intention of spreading our influence." However, this does not present the complete picture. Crisis management is among the primary peacetime roles of the navies. The Indian Navy needs to be able to control and contain crisis in its areas of maritime interest to prevent it from conflagrating into a violent conflict. It involves various measures ranging from demonstration of force to its graduated application. A naval practitioner would well understand that help to a neighbor cannot be provided without the capability of hard power projection. This is best exemplified by the Seychelles case itself. To avert the coup attempt during the critical period, the Indian warship INS Vindhyagiri, positioned at Port Victoria, overtly displayed what it could do using its main 4.5-inch gun and helicopter-borne commandos as a demonstration to the coup plotters. Hence, beyond the medium term, the Indian Navy's ability for hard power projection would only enhance its range of operational options to better serve the regional cause. Furthermore, in the foreseeable future, India's regional role is unlikely to overstretch beyond the limits of international norms of conduct for good reasons. India is unlikely to be the predominant global or even the regional military power. This would ensure checks and balances against its possible overreach. Besides, without the support of a military alliance, India is unlikely to possess sufficient wherewithal to resort to unilateral interventions against the opposition from the international community. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Gurpreet.